Today we're looking at Richard Rohr's The Universal Christ. I'm going to try to give you a summary or a too long didn't read. This is going to be a short video. I'm going to try to keep it around 5 minutes or so. And if you're interested, though, I do have a longer video. And if you're even more interested, we'll go buy the book. At the heart of the universal Christ is that while Jesus is the Christ is not limited to living only in Jesus. So let me share a quotation with you, and then I'll try to explain what that means. He says, most of the perennial traditions have offered explanations, and they usually go something like this. Everything that exists in material form is the offspring of some primal source which originally existed only as spirit. This infinite primal source somehow poured itself into finite, visible forms, creating everything from rocks to water, plants, organisms, animals, and human beings. Everything that we see with our eyes. This self-disclosure of whomever you call God into physical creation was the first incarnation, the general term for any enfleshment of spirit. And that's what he's going to call Christ, by the way. This first incarnation is Christ becoming matter. He goes on this happened long before the personal second incarnation that Christians believed happened in Jesus. To put this idea in Franciscan language, creation is the first Bible, and it existed 13.7 billion years before the second Bible was written. Okay, do you see what he's getting at is that Christ is the name for this enfleshment of God, not into Jesus, but into all of creation. And then later there is going to be this second incarnation of God into Christ, or Christ into Jesus, and that's going to be an enfleshment as a human being. So Christ and Jesus really aren't the same thing. Jesus is Christ, but Christ is not limited to Jesus. Christ is that thing that was there since the beginning, as the Gospel of John says, in the beginning was the Word, or the Christ, or the Logos, and the Word was with God, and through it all things were made. Jesus is the human manifestation of that Logos, or Christ. So on one hand, we have the view is that Christ is something that is universal, something that's eternal, with God since the beginning and in all things, including, by the way, in us. And that's going to be really important. And in this view, we also look at Jesus as the human manifestation of Christ, so we model ourselves after Jesus because he shows us the eternal Christ. And in the other view, the one that we're really brought up with, most of us are, is that we limit Christ to only a limited time in history, to a singular person, Jesus, a singular birth, a singular death, and a singular resurrection. There are great implications for learning to see the world through the first lens and not through the second lens, which is how we've been brought up. And I picked out a few of these that I'll share with you, and if you want to see more of them, like I said, go look at the longer video. We can see the Lord's Supper differently. It's not a ritual that we do to commemorate or to remember Jesus. It becomes a time when we celebrate the Christ with Jesus, right? We put Jesus Christ into our bodies and celebrate becoming one with Christ. So it's not just taking the Lord's Supper and remembering, oh, I remember when Jesus died and was resurrected, and now I look forward to heaven someday. But we actually are putting Christ into our body and becoming one with the universe and one with Christ. We understand Jesus' death, and particularly this concept of suffering differently. Jesus didn't die one time in history as an atonement for sin. Rather, his death was the model death of the many deaths that occur over and over again when an innocent person is put to death by the selfishness and the violence of the world. Likewise, his suffering is not limited to just him, just as our suffering is not limited to just us. Jesus does not suffer for us as much as Jesus suffers with us. We understand resurrection differently. This was not a one-time deal for one person. We participate in resurrection. Resurrection is for all things everywhere that die to an old life and are reborn and refreshed. One last example is individualism versus community. He says, looking at Christ in this limited way, as though Christ were confined to Jesus, gives us this hyper-individualism where we only care about ourselves, our salvation, our personal relationship. We fail to see Christ's love for others and in others and throughout history. And in fact, we turn Jesus more into our cheerleader or our mascot. So there you have it. I've tried to be pretty brief in this video. If it's piqued your interest, like I said, try my longer video or even more than that. I recommend the book very